Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of Grand Admiral Thrawn from the live-action Ahsoka series.
Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it.
Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. A local online New Zealand retailer has been stocking the most recent wave of Vintage Collection 3.75-inch Star Wars figures and curiously releasing them in batches of 2 or 3, so we've been keeping an eye out and grabbing them when they showed up. And the most recent batch included the Jetpack Trooper and Grand Admiral Thrawn from the Ahsoka live-action series, so of course we grabbed both of them. I've already opened up the Jetpack Trooper figure, I have that video linked down below, and now it's time to open up the Grand Admiral Thrawn figure. I love the Ahsoka live-action series, and of course I'm a big fan of Grand Admiral Thrawn. I'm really excited to finally add him into my Vintage Collection figure lineup from the Ahsoka live-action series. I also have on hand the Rebels animated series version of Thrawn from the Vintage Collection to do a bit of a side-by-side comparison, see if there are any similar part usage, and just to see those two side-by-side is going to be really fun, especially as a fan of Grand Admiral Thrawn. I want to add all the versions to my action figure collection. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take a closer look at the figure out of the packaging and do that side-by-side comparison. But first, let's take a quick look at the backing card. The backing cards used for the modern Vintage Collection line are heavily inspired by the original Kenner backing cards from the 1970s and 80s, including the classic Star Wars logo here at the top and the single chrome racetrack design surrounding the character art. For this one, of course, we have the Ahsoka series logo here at the top in red, and a very imperial red color is also used as the accent color for the nameplate and behind the figure. For this one, the title reads Grand Admiral Thrawn in a white font, and I think that red really highlights the white outfit of Thrawn here in the backing card. I really like the character artwork we have here for this backing card. It is so high res, you can even see the little stitching details where Thrawn's outfit has been patched up during his time on Peridea. I think that's just a really neat little detail that you can see there. It really shows the high resolution of this particular artwork. We can see his rank badges, his code cylinders, some really nice detail visible here. And of course, we've got the figure packaged here. Now, Thrawn doesn't come with a lot of accessories, but we do have a single blaster pistol accessory there. And of course, we have his white Imperial outfit with a black belt and black boots, but he's going to look really fun out of the packaging. I think he looks pretty cool even without accessories there. Moving on to the back. Now, of course, this is the modern style of backing cards for the Vintage Collection, where we have the accent color used across the top half and the pale gray across the lower half with the barcode and copyright information. We also have the Vintage Collection logo featured here on the back, and we have a nice image of the front of the backing card with the figure out of the packaging posed in front of the backing card. And as you can see, he does look pretty cool, just not really using his accessory. For this image, they have his blaster pistol tucked safely into his holster and his arms kind of crossed behind his back. And of course, we also have a little bit of a blurb for Grand Admiral Thrawn. It reads here, "A brilliant, ruthless strategist, Thrawn studies his enemies to gain tactical advantages often overlooked by his peers, stopping at nothing to secure a victory for himself and those he serves." So a nice, not too spoilery sort of bio there for Thrawn himself, not spoilery for the Ahsoka live-action series. This figure is number VC337 there, of course. Now, just to take a quick little look at the original Rebels backing cards, we see that we are using the same color here, which I like to see. I like it when they use the same accent color. We also have a white font for this Rebels version there. Now, in terms of the actual costume details, because we're going to be comparing the figures very soon, we can see that they did keep very closely to the original animated style here of Thrawn in Rebels. We've got the same shoulder details, the little details on the collar, his code cylinders, his rank badge, his belt. Just a few subtle differences on the belt. In the animated series, they went with more of a stylized kind of circle design. Of course, in the live-action series, we have the live-action Imperial officer style belt, which is more of sort of a cascading sort of pyramid of discs rather than this circle shape. We also have a silver dome here for his holster, which is not present on the live-action version. So we'll see if those details are present and are different on the actual figures as well. So let's open this one up. So now we have the Grand Admiral Vintage Collection figure out of the packaging, as well as his singular blaster pistol accessory. So let's get stuck in and check out the details. So I'll quickly go over the details as I can see them on this figure, then we'll grab in the Rebels animated series Vintage Collection figure for a bit of a side-by-side comparison, because I get the feeling there's going to be a few similarities between those two figures. But it is so exciting to finally have Grand Admiral Thrawn from the live-action Ahsoka series in action figure form. It was such a big deal when they finally revealed his face in those early trailers. It was so cool. So of course, one of the things that really stands out to me is, of course, we've finally got a very different Thrawn face matching the live action actor from this series, of course. So a little bit of a darker skin tone as well compared to the sort of lighter blue that we see in other versions, including in some of the sort of book and comic renditions as well. But I do think it's a pretty good likeness here in terms of both the color and the actual accuracy of the face. Of course, we've got the modern digital printing photorealistic details there. We've got the tiny little red eyes with a black dot. Of course, in the live action, we don't have the full red eyes of the Chiss species that have been seen in other versions there. And for this version of Thrawn, we have black hair. Of course, it is low and flat to the head, so this is just sculpted as part of a one piece with the head. So we don't have a seam line where two parts are joined around the hairline, and thankfully the actual painting around the hairline, it does look pretty tidy. I can just see one tiny little spot here where it looks like the sculpting carries just a little bit further forward compared to the black paint, but very, very minimal. This side looks a little bit better, and of course just a little bit of sort of extra plastic sticking out there in the back, but if I tip his head down, I'm not really going to see that too much. Nice painting there on the front. Of course, we've just got a tiny little bit of an accent at the lips, the eyebrows, and of course those eyes. It almost looks like we've got just a little bit of I can't tell if it's just shading or shadows on the cheeks, just to add a little bit more of a depth, a little bit more on this side. Can't quite tell if it's just shadows or shading. Really, really subtle, but a really good likeness there. I think that looks really cool. So of course, from the neck down, we've got a fairly standard Imperial uniform, but of course Thrawn does have some extra details. We've got the little silver bar and arrows on the collar. We have gold sort of epaulets on each shoulder. He has two code cylinders on his chest pockets there in silver on this particular figure, and of course we have his Grand Admiral rank badge consisting of blue, yellow and red sort of rank tiles there. A black Imperial officer style belt with a stud off to the left hand side of the silver belt buckle and a black holster. Now for this one, we have the lower half of the tunic is actually that kind of a rubbery plastic, which should help us get some articulation and poses with the lower legs. Of course, that means that the holster is part of it. It's not actually floating in front of it. We do have a gap there, so it is a little bit squishy there. So hopefully that means the blaster pistol accessory is going to fit in there nicely. Now, something I know is different from his appearance in the animated series Rebels is his pants. So in the live action movies going back to A New Hope, they had sort of military or riding style jodhpur pants that have these sort of flares, these peaks out on the thigh area before tucking back into the high knee-high black shiny riding boots. In the animated series, he's just wearing much straighter pants, so I am fairly certain that these are going to be different to the Rebels version of the Vintage Collection action figure. And then of course, topping off his outfit, we have the black boots. Now these are the sort of modern interpretations where we have this kind of little strap buckle here, which would of course be sort of hiding a little bit of an opening here, something like either a domed, elasticated or zipper opening. We've got this little sort of extra section here on both sides. Not something we saw on a lot of sort of Imperial action figures way back when, but it's a nice detail on the modern era there. And of course, no other details here on the lower parts of the boots. They're just black leather. Fun gloss though. I do like the sort of the leather creases that they have sculpted in here around the ankles. That looks really nice. So it's pretty plain in terms of the paint job, but I do unfortunately see a few flaws. Now we went over the face and I think the face is pretty good. Looking at the rank badge, the painted squares do line up pretty well to the sculpted sort of little raised rectangles there. The painting on the code cylinders does look pretty good and well matched up. Something about this this left one here just looks a shade bit tidier than the ones on the right. I think the ones on the right are just a little bit fine, actually, not quite enough paint. Something about this one feels like it sort of covered the sculpting detail a little bit more completely. We've got a really nice gold finish here on the shoulders, but just in sort of moving it around in the light, we do have, unfortunately, it either looks like it's been pinched or touched during construction, and it has kind of scratched into the gold a little bit. So there are two sections that look like maybe an undertone of silver or something where it's showing through a little bit. It is a little bit unfortunate. You can just kind of see it catching the light there. There's just two little sections of silver instead of the gold. This side is not as bad. There is this one little section there where it looks like something has kind of perhaps touched into the gold paint before it was completely dry. From the front, they do look rather tidy. At least they are lined up nicely to the sculpting. Just a little bit of a shame about that sort of scratch there into the gold on the top. We're looking at the top there. Now, something I've often found with sort of Imperial characters is the painting on the belt. I'm not quite sure why, but you'd think that something that's so standardized across a lot of Star Wars characters, Hasbro would have down pretty well, but I have noticed that this is a particular tricky spot. I had an issue with my Rebels Thrawn figure in terms of the painting on the belt, and it looks like we have a little bit of the similar kind of detail here. So I'm just going to quickly move Thrawn's arms out of the way so we can look at it. So of course we've got the belt is sculpted as part of the flexible lower half of the tunic. We have those side splits there. This one's nicely hidden in behind the holster, so we're not really going to see that one from the front. This one is a little bit more noticeable, of course, because we've got that little circular top to help avoid any splitting further of that when we open that one up. But so we have that join where we have the hard plastic torso connected into the more rubbery section of the lower half of the tunic here. Now on this one, we do actually have a nice sort of top paint of the black belt here, but there is a small section here where it looks like the black paint has been scratched, showing a darker or it's almost like a grey, or perhaps it is just the white plastic showing through. It's a little bit hard to tell. But something that bothers me is they never seem to, at least in the figures that I've always seen in stores, is line up the black paint all the way to the base of the holster sculpting. It's a little bit hard to show because it's white on white and then a stark black paint to it. But it doesn't quite go all the way down to the base of the holster. So it looks like the holster is white because of course it's made out of the same plastic. And then just the top section is painted. It's a little bit of a shame. I wish that was a really nice tidy line. And I know Hasbro can do that. I noticed some really nice black and white definition painting on the Jetpack Trooper that was in the same wave as this figure. Some really nice clean definition and lines between the black and the white. But on this one, there's just a whole lot of white on that holster that really should be black. And it's so along this front leading edge, it just catches my eye. Thankfully, the silver dome on the belt, everything looks nice there. We've got that little dome there in the belt buckle. But you can probably see on my one, it looks like we've had just a tiny bit of sort of just a little bit of a black spray. It's caught across the top edge of the belt buckle. I'm looking very close up, of course. And then we've got some tiny little black speckling, almost like there was a tiny bit of sort of like a brush flick or a little bit of airbrushing or something like that, where something's caught and it's just cast these little tiny little specks of black on the tunic. And I know accidents happen, but it's just unfortunate because this is such a white costume, so black specks are going to show up. Of course, it's probably not even really showing up on camera, and I am looking up very close, but it's just a little bit unfortunate because we do have such a stark contrast with the white and the black. Now for the rest of the figure, it's going to be pretty much just the very simple painting. Of course, the pants are white to match the tunic. Now, because we've got some different plastics here, we've got rubber here, harder plastic on some of these other points. I do like to see that the actual colors between these different plastics are a really nice match. When I'm just looking at it, I can't see a color difference between these components, which is really, really nice. It really bothers me, especially with something like Stormtroopers, where the helmet looks like a slightly different white to, say, the armor components of the body. That sort of, it just throws your eye because white is so true. You know, I don't mind different hues hues of white. There is cold and warm, but it just has to match. And I really like the fact that all of these plastic components being made of different pieces, of course, perhaps even different batches in the factory, but all assembled, they all look really nice, and I like that. And of course, something I really appreciate about the modern era of Hasbro is the attention to sort of fabric folds and draping and creases that they managed to get in with their sculpting. So of course, we've got lots of creases around the knee, bunching where these sort of flowy pants are tucked into the tighter boots here. Of course, we've just got these little folds across here around the torso. Of course, sort of where the seams and things like that would be pulling just ever so slightly. And of course, at the back there as well, we've got these little creases and folds. We've even got some seam lines here. Now, something that I note in Imperial Officer tunics is the back seams does change a little bit from costume to costume. So in the back on, I think it's the live action ones, the seams actually run into the to the sleeves, whereas this seam runs all the way up to the back. So I'm going to have to watch the Ahsoka live action series to see which version of the back seams they actually used for the live action version of Thrawn, because I think the seams running all the way up to the shoulder is true to the animated series, not the live action, because in the sort of the A New Hope original trilogy era, they based it off military uniforms, which use a slightly different seam. But of course, I'm going to have to go back and watch that. So please don't hold me to that if I have gotten it wrong for this particular figure. But I just like seeing the stitch lines on the back of these figures. I just think it's really nice. You can see those seam lines coming down here just on the back sort of skirt part here of the tunic there as well. We've even got the sort of the little folded over section here at the front where the tunic sort of crosses over the body. Really nice. I like the sculpting on this. I know Imperial officers are a little bit more on the simple side because, it is just sort of a jacket and pants. It's not as complicated as the ones with robes and lots of details. But when they are lining up, especially if you've got some Imperial characters like for Grand Admiral Thrawn, I cannot wait to get him on display alongside my vintage collection 3.75-inch Captain Enoch and those troopers, that 4-pack of troopers. I absolutely love the detail on those. I can't wait to see him alongside Captain Enoch. And of course, I've also got Morgan Elsbeth and that recent fantastic Ahsoka Tano in her Paradia white robes as well. There's been some really cool characters coming out from the Ahsoka live action series. And of course, Thrawn being so central, I was really excited to get him there. So before we do some comparisons, let's check out some quick articulation, and then we'll put his blaster accessory on there as well. So of course, he doesn't have anything too cumbersome in terms of his face, so he should be able to turn his head nicely. Of course, I always think of Thrawn as kind of having a little bit more of a lifted expression, sort of he doesn't look down so much, so I just like that pose there. Now, of course, we've got a fitted tunic, so that shouldn't actually get in the way of articulation. We don't have any sort of shoulder armor or any other sort of extra details that's really going to get in the way of moving his arms around. So not that he's going to be doing a lot of action poses, but I do kind of like that pose where we can sort of fold his arms behind his back. I think that's a very good Thrawn pose. So let's just quickly check out his elbows, make sure he can bend those nicely, and he can actually get his elbows quite close into the body there as well, which is nice to see if you want to sort of do some pointing, because of course we can see with his hand he does have an extended trigger finger, so it does give a little bit of a pointed pose there. His other hand is more of a classic C sort of style grip there for holding onto a staff. He doesn't have any other accessories, but I guess you can put in whatever you want there. So good elbows. He's not tight at all straight from the box, which is nice to see. So of course we can rotate the hands. We can rock the hands side by side, but I do find this slightly longer cuff sleeve on his tunic does tend to affect how far side to side we can get. It kind of hits a little bit, not really getting too much there. It is a little bit tight. On this other hand, that's more of a front sort of up and down, and we can actually get that one moving in that direction. You can see that there's less restriction in terms of the actual sculpting there. Of course, we can turn that hand there as well. So moving his arms up out of the way, let's test out his waist. So this one is a little bit clicky. You might even be able to hear it. It's definitely clicky. There are stop points. He doesn't turn, it's okay. It's not like fighting me, but there are sort of clicky points there. So he's not turning smoothly side to side. We do have a little bit of front to back there as well. Not a lot. It's kind of a bit clicky. He kind of goes forward and back. It's not a lot there. It kind of goes stiff back and then to about there. He's not leaning forward a lot. So just a little bit there. He does actually hold position. But yeah, it's not as fluid as in some ones. But the belt is kind of high, so I was expecting it to maybe provide a little bit of resistance in the back there. He can't lean all the way back because of that belt. Now, of course, we can see his articulation there around the hips. And we do have that rubbery belt. Now, I do like to test out the articulation, but I'm not going to stress these side splits too much. I have noticed in some of the figures you can actually creep a little split up the top there, so I'm not going to try and test that too much. But let's just quickly do some side splits. You can see the articulation style there. Nice and free in terms of the movement, actually. Not tight at all. I'm even sort of bending the knees there. And we also have that sort of swivel point at the upper thigh there, so you can swivel those around. Now, usually I don't like it when the sort of sculpting parts of the legs gets cut in half, but because that seam is completely hidden under the tunic, you can actually move it around and it doesn't kind of break the illusion there. You can just kind of see there. I can turn that around and it kind of breaks the point at the side there. I've now turned that, but it's kind of completely hidden by the tunic, so I don't actually mind that. But yes, his legs are turning very free. Let's just do a quick test out to the front. Not too bad, actually. That's quite good for the amount of sort of articulation. A lot of the time they do try and sort of help with these rubbery skirts, but they do provide a fair amount of resistance there at times. This one is not going to be quite as much because we've got that thicker element here with that holster sculpting there, so we can get not quite as high, but still that's pretty good, I think. And of course we've got the knee articulation nicely hidden by the sculpting here on the front of the pants. It's kind of draped just a little bit down, does a pretty good job of hiding that. Kind of, well, not quite loose, but very easy to move this particular knee. That moves very easily. This one is providing a little bit more of resistance there, and I can get them to about there. That's not too bad. Yes, this particular leg is quite freely moving, and we can get that point there on the ankles as well, about what I'd expect. Pretty easy to move, I have to say. He's not tight out of the package, and yeah, I can definitely feel that sort of rubber sort of tunic section there, and the articulation there with the hips really sort of helping with the posing. Not that he's going to be doing a lot of kicks, but if this is the kind of articulation that we're getting from the modern vintage collection, then that's really going to help with some of the, you know, acrobatic characters. So let's go and get his accessory into place. So we've got the tiniest little blaster pistol here. Of course, he doesn't really need it. He's more of a strategist rather than a sort of a frontline combat Imperial there, but we've got an enclosed trigger guard, so that should hopefully fit nicely on his finger. It's got some nice tidy sculpting. It doesn't feel rubbery. It feels like a fairly sturdy plastic with some nice details there. So let's go and test that in his hand. I'm hoping it's going to fit in fairly quickly. Just getting his finger into place there. Quite small in his grasp, but that goes in not too difficult, and he looks pretty good holding it. So that finger goes into the trigger guard. Quite good contrast. A lot of the figures have like black gloves, and then trying to show them holding a black blaster pistol can be tricky, but he's got quite good contrasting blue hands. Another element I quite like is the matching of blue. A lot of times we end up getting a painted, you know, like painted gloves or something like that, trying to match to the plastic used on the face. These hands look like they are a blue plastic, the same blue used as the face there. So we've got a perfect match between those two. Just as sort of a note there, I really like that. Such a very, very specific shade of blue. It would really bother me, I think, if his hands were a slightly different shade of blue to his face. So he's looking really cool there. But I do think, I just want to quickly see if I can get that sort of hands behind the back pose that we saw on the backing card. So let's go and put his blaster pistol in his holster. Okay, and as of course we had a little bit of a gap there at the bottom, so the tip of the blaster pistol just extends below the bottom there. It does look pretty good. It fits in there snugly. So let's test out if I can get those hands in behind. So I generally spend a little bit of time sort of working on the poses a little bit better, but just doing a really quick little play, we can kind of get to that pose. I'll probably, tweak in his arms a little bit better there. He does actually kind of want to bend a lot, which is kind of interesting. I thought he might be a little bit stiff. So it's a really quick pose. There we go. He looks pretty cool. I do quite like the likeness on this one. So now that we've gone through most of the details on this figure, let's bring in the Rebels Thrawn. So I have the backing card here as well. You can see this is from the Rebels series, of course. This one is VC337. Of course, this was back when we had that older black style of backing card there. So we can have a quick look. Of course, we can see the blues are very different. He has a different blaster pistol there. This is a bit more of a pointed animated style one there. Just going to pop that there to the side. So putting this one down with his arms down to the side so we can do a little bit more of a close comparison, because I get the feeling there is a lot of same parts here. And looking up yes, this tunic does look very similar. Okay, so there are a couple of sort of sculpting elements that you can sort of point to. Now on the Rebels one, we have these two sort of crease lines here, almost forming a little bit of a V directly under the code cylinder. I can see those same sculpting lines on the live action one there as well. And we have the same seams and creasing there in the back. And of course, all of those sort of shoulder details, same. Just a shame about that paint on that one there. Same belt. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we do have different pants now. The Rebels version of Thrawn, his tunic was very fitted, very smooth. It didn't have sort of realistic creases or anything like that. And he is wearing fitted pants on this version, where we do have that sort of riding style flared pants on that one. The boots do look the same. I'm not expecting those to be different. They're pretty standard Imperial issue. And of course, we have got that belt detail. If I just move that holster, I can see the sculpted little dome that is present and painted on this belt. You can see that little silver sort of stud at the top of the holster. That detail is actually present on this belt. It is simply not painted, so it's a little bit subtle, but it is still there. So in terms of the actual differences, I think it is just the different sculpted pants and of course the different face. So I don't know if that's going to be sort of a deal breaker for you. If you think that you like the look of this one, then there's not going to be too much difference. Just those very subtle differences in the sort of the adaptation between the animated series and the live action. Of course, both of them are in the modern vintage collection realistic style. Of course, we did have that old sort of animated 5-point of articulation action figure line when Rebels was released. Very glad to have the updated sort of realistic, more articulation version of the vintage collection so that I can add this one to my Rebels section. But yeah, there's such different faces and different blues, of course. In Rebels, he has that blue chiss with dark blue hair. In the live action, he has a darker blue skin tone and black hair. So a little bit of differences there. And I just want to have a quick look at the paint job on the rank badges. They do look very similar. I think I just like the rank badge detail on the Rebels one. There's just something about it that just reads just a tiny bit more tidier. But that is probably very specific to my two action figures that I'm comparing side by side. But it's so fun to see these two being added to the lineup of the vintage collection. You know, ever since he was introduced in Timothy Zahn's novel all those years ago, I've been such a fan of him, and having him in action figure form is really cool. Just another note, I talked about not exactly being a fan of the fact that the black on that holster doesn't go all the way down to the tunic. That was an an issue on my Rebels one as well. Very hard to show, but there is that sort of white baseline where the holster sculpting goes all the way down to the tunic, and it doesn't quite match up in terms of the paint. Something that really bothered me about this particular figure was the top of the belt has this missing patch of paint here. The belt is obviously made out of the white plastic of the tunic here, and the belt is supposed to be painted black over the top, but I have this section here that isn't fully painted where the black paint is missing, and thankfully it's not too noticeable from the front, but that was something that seemed to have been fixed or rectified. On this one that wasn't quite as common, because I actually spotted this particular flaw on a number of Thrawn figures available at my local store. Perhaps we just got a weird batch of them, but on my figure that issue is not there. I like that painting, even though we do have a tiny little bit of a black splatter. Again, very specific to my figure. So it's really fun to see these two side by side. I think it's kind of interesting where we are in New Zealand. This one is still floating around in a few places. It's a slightly older figure, but it's been so fun to just have so much Grand Admiral Thrawn merch available. We have these two figures and now available in New Zealand, and we also have two Funko Pop vinyl versions of Grand Admiral Thrawn, again from the Rebels animated series and the Ahsoka live action series. So if you're on the hunt, there are 4 Thrawn items available in New Zealand if you are a Grand Admiral Thrawn collector, and I certainly am, so I have all 4. If you do like Grand Admiral Thrawn, I'll have my Funko comparison video linked down as well. It was really fun to see those two side by side. I have to say, Funko actually put just a little bit more effort into making their 2 versions of Thrawn different, but I know that their figures are a bit more stylized. It probably doesn't take them quite as much work to sculpt a separate body for that one, but that was really fun to see those two side by side. For Hasbro's version, a lot of the same parts usage. I do think, of course, you know, perhaps the body type of the live action Thrawn isn't quite as accurate to how he appears because they've used the same body type of the Rebels Thrawn, which is a much more of a slender, stylized, animated figure. But seeing them together, I think they look really cool, and I like both of them. He does look different and unique to the Ahsoka live action series, particularly in the face sculpt and the blue tone of his skin. So I think this one would not look right if I wanted to put this one in with my live action Ahsoka. So I'm glad I have both, because I love Rebels and I love Ahsoka, and I'm trying to build up my action figure displays for both series. But this has been really fun to see them side by side, and I think that they're really cool. I just, because of course I bought this one online, I probably wouldn't have picked this one just with that black splatter, but he is tending to be a little bit harder to find, so I had to buy him online, and that was what I got in the mail. So just the pick of the bunch. You know, sometimes when you get things in the mail, they're not quite as good as you hope, but that's okay. Overall, he looks cool. I like the details, especially that face. It looks really, really nice. The modern sculpting and digital painting is just fantastic. So this was a lot of fun comparing the Ahsoka and Rebels live action and animated series versions of Thrawn from the vintage collection line. A lot of fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars vintage collection figure, checked out all the details, did a comparison, and had a lot of fun. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I recently opened up the fantastic Ahsoka Tano Paradia figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.